During a concert, George Strait stops everything after noticing a lost child in the audience. What he does next is unforgettable. The alarm clock pierced through the early morning silence of the small apartment in East Houston, its harsh electronic beeping echoing off the thin walls that had witnessed countless dreams being born and shattered. Maria Elena Martinez rolled over in bed, her calloused hands reaching instinctively to silence the noise before it could wake her husband Carlos, who had worked a double shift at the construction site just 6 hours earlier. The red digital numbers glowed mockingly in the darkness. 5:30 in the morning. Maria Elena sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, gathering the strength that had carried her family through 15 years of life in America. At 42, she carried the weight of two worlds on her shoulders, the memories of the small village in Michoacán where she was born, and the relentless pursuit of the American dream that had brought her family to this cramped two-bedroom apartment where hope lived alongside hardship. The sound of small feet padding across the worn linoleum floor announced the arrival of Sophia, her 6-year-old daughter, whose bright brown eyes held the innocence that Maria Elena fought every day to preserve. Sophia appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with tiny horses printed all over them that she had insisted on buying with her own allowance money. "Mommy, is today the day?" Sophia whispered, her voice carrying the excitement that had been building for months. Maria Elena's heart swelled with a mixture of love and disbelief. Today was indeed the day. After saving every spare dollar for 8 months, working extra cleaning shifts at the office building downtown, and sacrificing countless small luxuries, they finally had enough money for something that had seemed impossible just a year ago: 3 tickets to see George Strait in concert at NRG Stadium. "Sí, mi amor," Maria Elena replied, pulling her daughter into a warm embrace. "Today we see the King of Country." The story of Maria Elena's devotion to George Strait began 25 years earlier, when she was just 17 and had recently arrived in Houston with nothing but a suitcase and her mother's rosary. Working her first job at a small diner, she had been captivated by the voice that played constantly on the kitchen radio. George Strait's music had been her companion through the loneliness of those early years, his songs about love, loss, and perseverance speaking to her heart in ways that transcended language barriers. If you're following along with our story, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us about a time when music helped you through difficult moments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. We read every comment and love connecting with viewers from all around the world. She had learned English partly through his lyrics, memorizing every word to songs like Amarillo by Morning and I Cross My Heart. When she met Carlos at a church dance 3 years later, one of the first things she shared with him was her love for George Strait's music. Carlos, a man of few words who preferred norteño and mariachi, had listened patiently and eventually found himself humming along to George's songs while he worked. Now, as Maria Elena watched Sophia's excitement build, she marveled at how life had come full circle. This concert ticket wasn't just admission to a show. It was a symbol of everything they had achieved together as a family. The money hadn't come easy. While Carlos worked construction during the day, Maria Elena cleaned offices at night, often not returning home until 2 in the morning. Sophia, wise beyond her years, had watched her parents sacrifice and decided to contribute in her own small way. For 6 months, Sophia had been saving every penny she received. Birthday money from her grandmother, quarters found between couch cushions, the occasional dollar her parents gave her for good behavior. It all went into a small mason jar, hidden under her bed. She had saved $47.33, which she proudly presented to her mother one evening, announcing that she wanted to help buy the concert tickets. "Mommy," Sophia had said with the seriousness that only a 6-year-old could muster. "You work so hard, and you always sing his songs when you're happy. I want to help make you happy." Maria Elena had cried that night, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming pride of raising a daughter who understood sacrifice and love at such a young age. Carlos, despite his stoic exterior, had wiped away tears of his own when Maria Elena told him about Sophia's contribution. The tickets themselves had been another adventure. They couldn't afford the expensive seats near the stage, but Maria Elena didn't care. Section 512, row 25, seats 15 through 17 would be perfect. They would be in the upper deck, high above the field, but they would be there. They would be part of something magical. As the morning progressed, the excitement in the Martinez household was palpable. Carlos had taken the day off from work, a luxury he rarely afforded himself, and was busy preparing their simple lunch to take to the stadium. Sophia had laid out her outfit the night before. Her best jeans, a white t-shirt, and the small cowboy hat that Maria Elena had bought her for her birthday. It was a child-sized replica of the style George Strait was famous for wearing, and Sophia treasured it above all her other possessions. "Papa, do you think Mr. George will see us way up in the clouds?" Sophia asked, using her nickname for the singer she had heard so much about. Carlos chuckled, his weathered hands gentle as he adjusted his daughter's hat. "Mija, Mr. George has magic eyes. He can see everyone who loves his music, no matter how far away they are." Maria Elena smiled at her husband's words. Carlos might not have been born loving country music, but over the years he had come to understand what George Strait's songs meant to his wife. He had seen how her face lit up when Check Yes or No came on the radio, how she hummed, "I just want to dance with you," while doing household chores, and how she clutched his hand a little tighter when I Cross My Heart played during their rare quiet moments together. The drive to NRG Stadium took nearly 2 hours due to traffic, but nobody in the Martinez family minded. They sang along to George Strait songs on the radio, with Sophia providing enthusiastic backup vocals, despite not knowing all the words. Her favorite song was Troubadour, which she called the guitar song, and she would strum an imaginary guitar whenever it played. As they approached the massive stadium, Sophia pressed her face against the car window in amazement. She had never seen a building so large, with its gleaming exterior and endless streams of people walking toward the entrances. Cars filled every available parking space, and the excitement was contagious. People wore cowboy hats, boots, and George Strait t-shirts spanning decades of concert tours. "Mommy, there are so many people," Sophia exclaimed. "Do they all love Mr. George like you do?" "Even more than I do, mi amor," Maria Elena replied, though she secretly doubted that anyone in that stadium could love George Strait more than she did. Finding parking proved to be another adventure as Carlos circled the stadium twice before locating a spot nearly a mile away. The walk to the stadium entrance was a parade of excitement, with Sophia skipping ahead and turning back to wave at her parents, her small cowboy hat bouncing with each step. The security lines moved slowly, but the Martinez family didn't mind. They were surrounded by fellow fans, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. An elderly couple in front of them had been attending George Strait concerts for 30 years, and they regaled Sophia with stories of shows they had seen. Behind them, a group of college students shared photos on their phones of previous concerts, their enthusiasm infectious. When they finally entered the stadium, Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. The vast space seemed to stretch endlessly, with 3 tiers of seating surrounding a stage that looked impossibly small from their vantage point. The field level was already filling with people, and the energy was building steadily as more fans found their seats. Their climb to section 512 felt like scaling a mountain, with Sophia counting each step out loud until she reached 237. at which point she got distracted by a man wearing a hat with flashing lights. The view from their seats was spectacular in its own way. They could see the entire stadium, the city skyline in the distance, and the stage that would soon hold their hero. As they settled into their seats, Sophia carefully placed her small backpack beneath her chair. Inside was a hand-drawn picture she had made for George Strait, showing him wearing his cowboy hat while surrounded by musical notes and hearts. She had written, "Thank you for making Mummy happy," in her best first-grade handwriting, and she harbored a secret hope that somehow, some way, she might be able to give it to him. The lights dimmed at exactly 8 o'clock, and the roar from 80,000 fans was deafening. Sophia grabbed her mother's hand tightly as the stage erupted in an explosion of lights and music. When George Strait emerged wearing his signature black cowboy hat and simple button-down shirt, Maria Elena gasped audibly, tears immediately streaming down her face. "Es él, mi amor," she whispered to Sophia, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "It's really him." George opened with, "Here, for a good time," and the entire stadium became a sea of singing voices and swaying bodies. Sophia watched in fascination as her mother transformed before her eyes. The tired woman who worked 2 jobs and worried constantly about bills had been replaced by a radiant, joyful person singing every word with perfect pronunciation. This was a side of her mother that Sophia had only glimpsed during their quiet car rides when George's songs played on the radio. Carlos, usually reserved and practical, found himself caught up in the energy as well. He didn't know all the words, but he clapped along and smiled as he watched his wife's pure happiness. For him, this concert wasn't about the music. It was about seeing Maria Elena experience something she had dreamed about for over 2 decades. Song after song filled the stadium with memories and melodies that had soundtracked countless American lives. The crowd sang in unison, creating moments so powerful that Sophia felt goosebumps on her arms despite not understanding why. Couples embraced during romantic ballads, while upbeat numbers had everyone laughing and cheering. Sophia was particularly enchanted by the massive video screens that magnified George's every movement. She studied his face, noting the kind eyes and gentle smile that her mother had described countless times. When he tipped his hat to the crowd, Sophia instinctively touched her own small cowboy hat, feeling a connection across the vast distance. "Mommy, he looks like a nice grandpa," Sophia observed during a brief pause between songs. "He is nice, mi amor," Maria Elena replied, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. "That's why I love his music so much. You can hear the goodness in his voice." As the first hour of the concert progressed, Sophia found herself completely mesmerized by the spectacle. The lights, the music, the energy of the crowd. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She understood now why her mother played these songs when she needed comfort, why she hummed them while cooking dinner, and why she sometimes cried when certain melodies filled their small apartment. When George announced a 20-minute intermission, the spell was temporarily broken. The lights came up partially, and thousands of people began moving toward concession stands and restrooms. Sophia tugged on her mother's sleeve, making the universal childhood gesture that indicated an urgent need for the bathroom. "Carlos, I'm taking Sophia to the restroom," Maria Elena announced over the noise of the crowd. "We'll be right back." Passeos estes. The journey from their seats to the nearest restroom was like swimming upstream against a river of people. Sophia held tightly to her mother's hand as they navigated through crowds of adults who towered above her like giants. The concrete corridors echoed with conversations, laughter, and the distant sound of vendors hawking merchandise. The women's restroom line stretched nearly 50 feet into the hallway, a testament to poor planning that seemed to plague large venues everywhere. Maria Elena sighed and took her place at the end of the line, keeping Sophia close as they slowly shuffled forward. "Mummy, will Mr. George still be there when we get back?" Sophia asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Si, mi amor. This is just a break. He'll come back and sing more beautiful songs for us." The line moved with agonizing slowness, and Maria Elena began to worry about making it back to their seats. Before the second half began, around them, other women expressed similar concerns, checking their phones and calculating how much time remained. Sophia entertained herself by counting ceiling tiles and trying to memorize melodies her mother hummed softly. When they finally reached the restroom, Sophia was quick and efficient, eager to return to the magical world of music and lights. But as they emerged, Maria Elena realized they faced a new challenge, navigating back through the maze of corridors to find their section. The stadium's layout, which had seemed straightforward on their way to the restroom, now appeared confusing and disorienting. Signs pointed in multiple directions, and the crowds had shifted during their absence. Maria Elena paused at a junction of hallways, trying to remember which path they had taken. "This way, Mammy," Sophia said confidently, pointing down a corridor that looked familiar to her 6-year-old eyes. They walked for several minutes before Maria Elena realized they were heading in the wrong direction. The section numbers they passed were getting lower, not higher, which meant they were moving away from their seats. She stopped and looked around, trying to get her bearings. "Excuse me," she asked a passing stadium employee. "Can you tell me how to get to section 512? The young man, clearly overwhelmed by hundreds of similar questions, pointed vaguely toward escalators. "Up there, then follow the signs," he said without stopping. Maria Elena and Sophia joined another stream of people heading toward the escalators, but when they reached the top, the signage was even more confusing. Sophia, who had been patient during their bathroom expedition, was now getting anxious about missing the concert. "Mummy, the music sounds far away," she observed, and she was right. They could hear faint sounds of George's band warming up for the second set, but it seemed to be coming from a different direction than expected. It was at this moment of confusion that disaster struck. As Maria Elena studied a large stadium, map mounted on the wall, trying to locate their section, Sophia spotted what she thought was a shortcut. A group of people was heading down a different corridor, and she could hear music more clearly from that direction. Without thinking, Sophia let go of her mother's hand and took several steps toward the sound. It was only when she turned back to say, "This way, Mommy," that she realized her mother was no longer visible. The corridor had filled with people returning from intermission, and Maria Elena had been blocked from view by a group of tall men in cowboy hats. Sophia's heart began to race as she looked around frantically. Every direction looked the same: concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and endless streams of people who all seemed to tower above her. She tried to retrace her steps, but the crowd had shifted and moved, making it impossible to find the map where she had last seen her mother. "Mammy!" she called out. But her small voice was lost in the din of thousands of conversations and footsteps echoing off concrete surfaces. Panic set in as Sophia realized she was completely alone in a sea of strangers. She began to cry, tears streaming down her face as she frantically searched for any sign of her mother's familiar face or her father's work-worn hands. Every adult around her seemed focused on getting back to their seats, eager not to miss any of the second half. "Excuse me," Sophia said to a woman in a bedazzled shirt, tugging gently on her sleeve. "I can't find my mammy." The woman glanced down distractedly, clearly focused on her own agenda. "Oh, honey, I'm sure she's around here somewhere," she said, dismissively before hurrying away without offering any real help. Sophia tried again, with a man wearing a cowboy hat, similar to her father's. "Sir, can you help me find my parents?" "Sorry, kiddo, I don't work here," the man replied, barely slowing his pace. Try asking security." But Sophia didn't know what security looked like or where to find them. She was lost in a maze of concrete and crowds, surrounded by people who seemed too busy to notice one small, frightened child. Meanwhile, back at the stadium map, Maria Elena's initial confusion had turned to pure terror. She spun around wildly, calling Sophia's name, but the little girl was nowhere to be seen. Other concert-goers began to notice the distraught woman, but their offers to help seemed inadequate against the vastness of the stadium and the thousands of people moving in every direction. "Sophia! Sophia!" Maria Elena screamed, her voice becoming hoarse with desperation. She began running down corridors, checking every bathroom, every concession stand, every possible place a lost child might wander. Carlos, meanwhile, had remained at their seats as instructed. But as the minutes ticked by without any sign of his wife and daughter, his own anxiety began to build. The second half of the concert was about to begin, and the crowd was settling back into their seats. He pulled out his phone, but there was no cell service in the packed stadium. Back in the corridor maze, Sophia's panic was reaching a crescendo. Her small voice was lost in the chaos, and her tears had turned into full-blown sobs. It was then that she spotted a man in a black uniform with security printed in white letters across his chest. Relief flooded through her as she approached, him certain that this was the help everyone had told her to find. "Excuse me, sir," Sophia said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I'm lost. I can't find my mummy and puppy." The security guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Rick Thompson, looked down at Sophia with obvious irritation. He had been working stadium events for 15 years, and lost children were nothing new to him. What annoyed him most was that parents seemed to think the security staff were babysitters for their irresponsible choices. "Where were you sitting?" he asked curtly, not bothering to kneel down to Sophia's level or soften his tone. 512, Sophia replied, her voice shaking. "My mommy went to find the bathroom and I got lost." Rick sighed heavily, as if Sophia's predicament was a personal inconvenience to him. "Listen, kid, I'm not a babysitter. You need to stay with your parents. That's their job, not mine." Sophia's eyes widened with confusion and hurt. This wasn't the help she had expected. "But I don't know where they are," she whispered. "Well, maybe next time you'll think about that." "Before wandering off," Rick replied harshly. "I've got real security issues to deal with tonight. Just go back to your section and wait for them there." "But I don't know how to get there," Sophia protested, fresh tears streaming down her face. Rick pointed vaguely down a corridor. "Follow the signs, and next time hold your mama's hand like you're supposed to." With that dismissive comment, Rick walked away, leaving Sophia standing alone in the corridor, more frightened and confused than ever. The man who was supposed to help her had made her feel like the whole situation was her fault. Her 6-year-old mind couldn't understand why an adult would be so mean when she was scared and needed help. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, watching Rick's retreating figure disappear into the crowd. Then, driven by desperation and the faint sound of music that seemed to be coming from below, she began walking toward what she hoped might lead her back to her parents. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, each one looking exactly like the last. Sophia's small legs were getting tired, and her cowboy hat had slipped down over her eyes from all her running around. She pushed it back up and continued walking, following the sound of music that grew slightly louder with each step. Finally, she found herself at the edge of a different section entirely, the field level, where she could see the stage much more clearly than from her family's seats high in the upper deck. The security barriers that separated the crowd from the stage area were right in front of her, and she could see George Strait's band members preparing for the second set. It was here, pressed against the cold metal barriers with tears still streaming down her face, that Sophia's ordeal would take an unexpected turn. The very stage she had admired from afar was now just 50 feet away. But she had never felt more alone or scared in her young life. The stage lights blazed to life, with an intensity that made Sophia squint even through her tears. The roar of 80,000 fans welcoming George Strait back for the second half of his concert was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate through her small body. From her position pressed against the security barrier at field level, Sophia had an unobstructed view of the stage, but all she could think about was finding her parents. George emerged from the wings with the confidence of a man who had performed this ritual thousands of times over 5 decades. At 70 years old, he moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, acknowledging the crowd with a subtle tip of his black cowboy hat. The stadium erupted in appreciation as he approached the microphone, his guitar hanging comfortably across his chest. "Well, hello, Houston," George said, his voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had made him the undisputed king of country music. "Y'all ready to hear some more music tonight?" The crowd's response was thunderous, but Sophia barely heard it. She was scanning the field-level section frantically, hoping against hope that she might spot her parents among the thousands of faces. Her small hands gripped the cold metal barrier so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, and her cowboy hat sat askew on her head from all her running through the corridors. George began his next song, and the familiar melody that had echoed through the Martinez household countless times filled the stadium. But as he sang, something caught his attention in his peripheral vision. Years of performing had given him an almost supernatural ability to read a crowd, to sense the energy and mood of his audience. Tonight, something felt different. There, pressed against the barrier directly in front of the stage, was a small figure that seemed out of place among the adults surrounding her. Even from the stage, George could see that the child was distressed. Her shoulders were shaking, and she kept turning her head from side to side as if searching for someone. George Strait had built his legendary career on authenticity and genuine connection with his fans. Unlike many performers who got lost in the spectacle of their shows, he had always maintained an awareness of his audience, often making eye contact with individual fans and acknowledging their presence. It was this attentiveness that made him notice Sophia when dozens of security personnel and thousands of other concert-goers had failed to truly see her distress. As he continued singing, George kept glancing toward the small figure at the barrier. The child's body language spoke of fear and desperation, and something about the situation triggered his protective instincts. He had raised children of his own, and he knew the difference between a child having fun at a concert and a child in genuine distress. Midway through the song, George made a decision that would surprise everyone in the stadium, including his own band members. He stopped singing. The music continued for a few beats as the musicians, confused by the sudden change, gradually realized their lead singer was no longer performing. One by one, the instruments fell silent until only the hum of amplifiers and the confused murmur of 80,000 fans filled the air. George walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on Sophia. Even from 30 feet away, he could see that she was crying. The stadium lights illuminated the tears streaming down her face, and her small frame was trembling with what was clearly fear rather than excitement. "Hold on just a minute, folks," George said into his microphone, his voice carrying the calm authority that had commanded respect throughout his career. "We've got a little situation here that needs our attention." The entire stadium fell silent. Tens of thousands of people following George's gaze toward the small figure at the front barrier. Sophia, suddenly aware that everyone was looking at her, felt a new wave of panic wash over her. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing closer to the barrier as if she could disappear into it. "Sweetheart," George called out, his voice gentler now, speaking directly to Sophia through the sound system. "Are you okay down there?" Sophia looked up at the stage with wide, tear-filled eyes. The man her mother had loved for 25 years, the voice that had provided comfort during their family's hardest times, was talking directly to her. She tried to respond, but her voice was too small to carry over the distance and the sound equipment. George made another unprecedented decision. He set his guitar down and walked to the steps at the side of the stage, something that violated every security protocol for an event of this magnitude. His security team immediately moved to intercept him, but George waved them off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Sir, you can't leave the stage area," his head of security said, urgently into his earpiece. "We haven't cleared the crowd." "That's a child who needs help," George replied firmly, his voice carrying the steel that had made him successful in an industry that didn't tolerate weakness. "And I'm going to help her." As George descended the steps and walked toward the barrier, the stadium remained in stunned silence. Nobody could quite process what they were witnessing. The king of country music, in the middle of his farewell tour, was stopping his show to check on one small fan. Sophia watched in amazement as the man from the stage grew larger and more real. With each step he took toward her, this wasn't the distant figure on the video screens. This was an actual person walking directly to her, concern evident in his weathered face. When George reached the barrier, he knelt down to Sophia's eye level, his movements careful and deliberate. Up close, she could see the kindness in his eyes that her mother had always talked about, the genuine warmth that made millions of people feel like he was singing directly to them. "What's your name, sweetheart?" George asked softly, his voice now without the amplification of the sound system, but somehow more powerful in its intimacy. "Sophia," she whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Sophia Martinez." "Hi, Sophia, I'm George. Now can you tell me what's wrong? Are you hurt?" Sophia shook her head, then burst into fresh tears. "I can't find my mommy and papi. We were going to the bathroom, and I got lost, and the security man was mean to me, and I don't know how to get back to section 512. George's expression darkened slightly at the mention of the security incident, but he kept his voice gentle. "Well, Sophia Martinez, we're going to fix this right now. Can you tell me about your parents? What do they look like?" "My mommy has long black hair, and she loves your music so much. She sings your songs when she's cleaning and when we're in the car. She saved money for a long time to buy tickets because today is her birthday, and seeing you was her biggest dream." George felt his heart clench at Sophia's words. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a family whose entire celebration had been derailed by a simple mistake. He thought about his own children and grandchildren, imagining how terrified they would be in Sophia's situation. "She saved money to see me for her birthday?" George asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia nodded enthusiastically, momentarily forgetting her fear as she talked about her mother. "She works 2 jobs, and my puppy works construction, and I saved my allowance money too because I wanted to help. Mommy cried when I gave her my $47.33. The detail about Sophia's contribution to the ticket fund hit George like a physical blow. Here was a 6-year-old child who had given up her own spending money to help make her mother's dream come true. And now that dream was turning into a nightmare because of the family's separation. "What about your puppy?" George asked, still kneeling beside the barrier, despite the crowd of security personnel gathering around them. "His name is Carlos, and he wears a hat like yours, but brown, and he learned to like your music because it makes Mommy happy. He took the day off work to come here, which he never does." George nodded, understanding the full picture now. This was a working-class family that had sacrificed significantly to attend this concert, and their special night was being ruined by circumstances beyond their control. "Sophia, I want you to look around at all these people behind me," George said, gesturing toward his security team and stage crew who had followed him down from the stage. These are my friends, and they're going to help us find your parents right now. But first, I want to ask you something important." Sophia wiped her eyes and looked up at him expectantly. "Would you like to come up on stage with me while we wait for them to find your mammy and pappy? I think you'll be able to see better from up there, and I promise I'll keep you safe." Sophia's eyes widened with disbelief. "On the stage? With you?" "That's right. We're going to make sure your parents know exactly where you are, and then we're going to turn this scary night into something special." For the first time since becoming lost, Sophia smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it transformed her tear-stained face completely. George stood up and addressed his security team. "I want an immediate announcement over the PA system describing Sophia's parents and asking them to come to the stage area. I also want you to find out which security officer was rude to this child, because we're going to have a conversation about that." His tone when mentioning the security incident carried an edge that made several staff members straighten up involuntarily. George Strait might have been known for his gentle demeanor, but he was also a man who didn't tolerate the mistreatment of children. As his team scrambled to carry out his instructions, George turned back to Sophia. "Are you ready to come up and meet my band? They're really nice, and I think they'd like to meet the young lady whose family saved up to see us tonight." Sophia nodded eagerly, her fear beginning to transform into excitement as the reality of what was happening started to sink in. George carefully lifted her over the barrier, noting how light she was, how her small cowboy hat had been knocked askew during her ordeal. As they walked toward the stage together, Sophia looked up at him with pure amazement. "Mr. George, are you really going to help me find my parents?" "Sophia," George replied, his voice carrying the conviction of a man who had never broken a promise. To a child, "I'm not going to stop until your family is back together, and then we're going to make sure this becomes the best birthday your mama ever had." As George and Sophia walked hand in hand toward the stage, the stadium's PA system crackled to life with an announcement that sent shockwaves through the massive crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special situation tonight. We're looking for the parents of Sofia Martinez, a 6-year-old girl wearing a small cowboy hat. Her parents are Maria Elena and Carlos Martinez, sitting in section 512. If you are Sophia's parents or know where they are, please come immediately to the main stage area. Sophia is safe and with Mr. Strait." The announcement was repeated in Spanish, and the effect was immediate. Throughout the stadium, people began looking around, searching for the frantic parents who were surely somewhere in the crowd. Cell phones came out as concert-goers started calling and texting friends in other sections, creating an impromptu network of good Samaritans determined to reunite the family. High up in section 512, Carlos Martinez heard the announcement and felt his knees buckle. The relief of knowing Sophia was safe mixed with the surreal disbelief that his daughter was somehow with George Strait himself. He began pushing through the row of seats, apologizing to other fans as he made his way to the aisle. Meanwhile, Maria Elena was in a completely different section of the stadium, having expanded her desperate search far beyond the area where she had lost Sophia. She was questioning every security guard she could find when she heard her daughter's name echoing through the sound system. The announcement hit her like lightning, and she began running toward the main stage area, tears of relief streaming down her face. On stage, George had settled Sophia on a small stool next to his microphone stand. His band members, initially confused by the unprecedented interruption, were now completely charmed by the small girl who sat among them with wide-eyed wonder. Sophia's fear had transformed into amazement as she took in the view from the stage. 80,000 people spread out before her like a sea of lights and faces. "How are you feeling up here, Sophia?" George asked, adjusting the microphone so the crowd could hear her response. "It's really high up," Sophia said into the microphone, her small voice echoing through the stadium and earning a collective awe from the audience. "Can my mummy and papi see me from here?" "They're going to see you real soon," George assured her. "But while we're waiting for them, I want to tell everyone here about what happened to you tonight." George's expression grew more serious as he addressed the crowd. "Folks, this little lady got separated from her parents during intermission, and when she asked a security guard for help, she was treated in a way that no child should ever be treated. Someone whose job it is to help people in need told her that he wasn't a babysitter and made her feel like being lost was her fault." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Sophia nodded solemnly, remembering the mean man who had made her feel even more scared. "Now, I want that security guard to come up here to the stage," George continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "We're going to have a little conversation about how we treat people who need help, especially children." In the crowd control area near the stage, Rick Thompson felt his stomach drop. He had been monitoring the situation from a distance, hoping that his earlier encounter with the lost child would go unnoticed in the chaos of a major event. Now, with 80,000 witnesses, he was being called out by the biggest star in country music. "I said I want that security guard up here now," George repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And I know who you are because my people have already identified you." Reluctantly, Rick began making his way toward the stage, his face red with embarrassment and anger. He climbed the steps slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, while the crowd watched in absolute silence. When Rick reached the stage, George positioned him directly in front of Sophia, who looked up at the man who had been so cruel to her just an hour earlier. "This is Rick Thompson," George announced to the crowd, "and Rick is going to explain to Sophia and to all of us why he thought it was appropriate to dismiss a scared 6-year-old child who was asking for help." Rick shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to be anywhere else in the world. "Look, Mr. Strait, I deal with a lot of situations during these events, and sometimes—" "Stop right there," George interrupted firmly. "You're not talking to me right now. You're talking to Sophia. Look at her and tell her why you treated her the way you did." Rick looked down at Sophia, who was watching him with the honest, expectant gaze that only children possess. In that moment, faced with her innocence and vulnerability, the anger and defensiveness drained out of him. "Sophia," Rick said quietly, his voice barely audible through the stage monitors, "I'm sorry I was wrong to treat you that way. When you're scared and need help, it's my job to help you, not to make you feel worse." "It's okay," Sophia replied, with the quick forgiveness of childhood. "But next time, maybe you can be nicer to little kids who are lost." "I promise I will," Rick said, and for the first time that evening, his words carried genuine sincerity. George nodded approvingly. "Rick, I want you to remember this moment. Every person who asks you for help is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's whole world. We treat people with dignity not because it's easy, but because it's right." The crowd erupted in applause, and Rick, humbled by the experience, shook Sophia's small hand before returning to his duties with a new perspective on his role in helping others. It was at this moment that Carlos burst through the crowd control barriers, his work boots slipping on the smooth floor as he ran toward the stage. Security guards moved to stop him, but George quickly waved them off. "Let him through! That's Sophia's papa!" Carlos climbed the stage steps 3 at a time, and Sophia leaped from her stool into his arms, both of them crying as they held each other tightly. "Mira, I was so scared," Carlos whispered in Spanish, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I had lost you forever. Papa, Mr. George helped me, and look, I'm on the stage with the band." George watched the reunion with a smile, but his attention was soon drawn to another commotion at the edge of the stage area. Maria Elena had arrived, and she was fighting through security barriers with the determination of a mother reuniting with her child. "That's her mama," George announced, and once again security stepped aside to allow the frantic woman passage. When Maria Elena saw Sofia safe in Carlos's arms on the stage with George Strait, she collapsed to her knees with relief. George himself came down to help her up the steps, supporting her as she climbed to reach her family. The reunion on stage was witnessed by 80,000 people, but it felt as intimate as if it were happening in the Martinez family's living room. Maria Elena wrapped her arms around both Sofia and Carlos, the three of them forming a tight circle of relief and love. "Thank you," Maria Elena said to George through her tears, speaking in English despite her overwhelming emotions. "Thank you for taking care of our baby." "Ma'am, she's a special little girl," George replied. "And before we continue with our evening, I want to hear more about your family. Sofia told me today is your birthday and that you saved up for a long time to be here tonight." Maria Elena nodded, still not quite believing she was having a conversation with her musical hero while standing on his stage. "She also told me that Sofia contributed her own allowance money to help buy the tickets, $47.33, she said. "She counted every penny," Maria Elena confirmed, looking down at her daughter with pride. "She wanted to help make my dream come true." George felt that familiar tightness in his chest that came when he encountered stories of genuine sacrifice and love. "Well, I think we need to make sure this birthday celebration is everything you dreamed it would be and more." He turned to address the crowd, his arm around the Martinez family. "Folks, I want you to meet the Martinez family. Maria Elena, who has been a fan of my music for 25 years. Carlos, who took the day off work to be here tonight. And Sofia, who saved up her allowance money to help make her mama's birthday dream come true." The stadium erupted in cheers and applause, with many fans wiping away tears of their own as they witnessed this unexpected display of family love and sacrifice. "Now, Maria Elena," George continued, "Sofia tells me that your favorite song is I Cross My Heart. Is that right?" Maria Elena nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. "Well then, I think it's time for a very special performance." George gestured to his band, who immediately began the gentle opening notes of the beloved ballad. As the familiar melody filled the stadium, he placed his iconic black cowboy hat on Sofia's head, the same hat that had graced countless album covers and concert stages. "This one's for you, birthday girl," George said to Maria Elena, then knelt down to Sofia's level. "And Sofia, I want you to help me sing this for your mama. Can you do that?" Sofia nodded enthusiastically, the oversized hat slipping down over her eyes. As George began to sing the song that had been the soundtrack to so many of Maria Elena's dreams, Sofia chimed in with her sweet 6-year-old voice during the chorus, creating a moment that no one in the stadium would ever forget. As George's voice filled the stadium with the opening lines of I Cross My Heart, something magical happened that transcended the typical concert experience. 80,000 fans fell silent, not with the respectful quiet of a formal performance, but with the hushed reverence reserved for witnessing something sacred. This wasn't just a song anymore. It was a moment of pure human connection being shared by an entire community. Sofia's small voice joined George's during the chorus, her words clear and sweet despite the enormous hat that kept slipping over her eyes. She knew every word, having heard her mother sing this song countless times while cooking dinner, folding laundry, and during those quiet moments when Maria Elena thought no one was listening. Now standing on the biggest stage in Texas, Sofia was singing it back to her mother as a gift more precious than any wrapped present. Maria Elena stood frozen in amazement, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter and her musical hero perform together. Carlos, the practical man who had always expressed love through actions rather than words, found himself crying openly as he witnessed his wife's dream not just being fulfilled, but being exceeded in ways that seemed impossible just hours earlier. When the song ended, the stadium erupted in the longest ovation of George's 50-year career. But George wasn't finished with his surprises. "You know, folks," George said, his arm still around the Martinez family, "birthdays deserve birthday songs. And since we have 80,000 of Maria Elena's new friends here tonight, I think we should all sing happy birthday together." He gestured to the crowd, and without any musical accompaniment, 80,000 voices began singing "Happy Birthday" in a harmony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stadium. When they reached "Happy Birthday, Dear Maria Elena," the sound was so powerful that it could be heard for miles beyond the stadium walls. As the song concluded, George knelt down to Sophia's level once more. "Sophia, your mama's birthday isn't over yet. I have some special presents for your family." "Ooh." He stood and addressed the crowd while keeping the Martinez family close. "This family saved for months to be here tonight. Sophia contributed her own allowance money because she wanted to help make her mother's dream come true. That kind of love and sacrifice deserves to be rewarded." George's tour manager appeared at the edge of the stage, carrying an envelope and a small wrapped box. "First," George announced, "the Martinez family is now my personal guest for every concert I perform. In Texas for the rest of my career. Front row seats, backstage passes, travel and hotel expenses included." The crowd's cheers were deafening, but George held up his hand to indicate he wasn't finished. "Second, Sophia, that drawing you made for me, that's in your backpack. Papa told me about it while we were singing. I want to see it, and I want to make a deal with you." Sophia looked up at her father, who nodded encouragingly. She ran to retrieve her small backpack from where she had left it at her stool, and carefully pulled out the hand-drawn picture she had made. Her child's artwork showed George wearing his cowboy hat, surrounded by musical notes and hearts, with "Thank you for making Mommy happy" written in careful first-grade handwriting. George studied the drawing with the serious attention it deserved, then showed it to the crowd on the big screens. "This is the most beautiful picture anyone has ever made for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "In Sophia, I want to hang this in my dressing room for every show for the rest of my career." But his biggest surprise was yet to come. Now, Sophia's mama works 2 jobs, and her papa works construction, and they both work incredibly hard to provide for their family. But Sophia told me that her mama has always dreamed of her daughter studying music. So tonight, I'm establishing a full music scholarship in Sophia's name that will cover music lessons, instruments, and music education from now until she graduates from college. Maria Elena gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. This wasn't just a gift. This was a transformation of their family's entire future. Sophia could pursue music without the financial burden that had made it seem impossible. "And one more thing," George continued, his eyes twinkling with the joy of someone who loved giving surprises. "Sophia, would you like to learn to play guitar?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Well then, this is for you." He handed her the small wrapped box, which contained a child-sized acoustic guitar, beautifully crafted and engraved with her name. As Sophia unwrapped her gift, George made one final announcement that would prove to be prophetic. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a feeling that this won't be the last time you see Sophia Martinez on a stage. Something tells me she's going to make beautiful music for many years to come." The rest of the concert continued with an energy that seemed to lift the entire stadium. George performed his biggest hits while the Martinez family remained on stage, Sophia clutching her new guitar and wearing George's hat like a crown. The crowd sang along with extra enthusiasm, as if they had all become part of an extended family, celebrating together. When the concert finally ended, George spent another hour with the Martinez family backstage, talking with them about music, dreams, and the importance of family. He gave Sophia her first guitar lesson, showing her how to hold the instrument and play a simple chord. "Remember, Sophia," he told her as the evening wound down, "music is about sharing your heart with others. You've already got the most important part, a loving heart. The rest is just practice." 1 year later, George Strait returned to Houston for what he had announced would be the final concert of his farewell tour. The same stadium was packed once again, but this time there was an extra buzz of anticipation among the fans who had heard the story of Sophia Martinez. As George took the stage for his last performance, he carried with him a small acoustic guitar. "A year ago, on this very stage, I met a little girl named Sophia, who reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," he told the crowd. "Tonight, she's going to join me for one final song." Sophia walked onto the stage, now 7 years old, and carrying herself with the confidence of a child who had spent a year studying music with some of the best teachers in Texas. Her guitar skills had progressed remarkably, fueled by natural talent and the determination she had inherited from her parents. Maria Eleanor and Carlos watched from the front row, tears in their eyes as they saw their daughter living a dream they never could have imagined possible. The cleaning lady and the construction worker had raised a little girl who was about to perform with the king of country music in front of 80,000 people. George and Sophia sat on stools center stage, their guitars positioned perfectly for the intimate duet they had rehearsed. As George began the opening chords of "I Cross My Heart," Sophia joined in with her clear, sweet voice and skillful guitar playing. The stadium was silent except for their voices and guitars, creating a moment of pure magic that seemed to suspend time itself. When they finished, the ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes, with fans on their feet screaming and crying at the beauty of what they had witnessed. As George took his final bow of his legendary career, he pulled Sophia close and whispered something in her ear that only she could hear. "Keep making music, little one. The world needs your beautiful heart." Years later, when Sophia Martinez became a successful recording artist in her own right, she would always begin her concerts by telling the story of the night a scared little girl got lost at a George Strait concert and found her destiny instead. She would credit that evening not just with launching her musical career, but with teaching her the most important lesson of her life, that when we treat each other with kindness and dignity, we create the possibility for miracles. The George Strait Scholarship Fund continued to help young musicians long after his retirement, and every recipient knew the story of Sophia Martinez, the little girl whose family's sacrifice and love had moved the king of country music to change her life forever. Rick Thompson, the security guard who had learned such a powerful lesson that night, went on to become a beloved figure at the stadium, known for his special kindness to families with children. He kept a photo of himself with Sophia on his desk, a reminder of the night he learned that every person who asks for help deserves to be treated with respect and compassion. The Martinez family never forgot that magical evening when their worst fear turned into their greatest blessing. It became the story they told at every family gathering, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful moments in life come from the most unexpected places. And every year, on Maria Elena's birthday, the family would gather around Sophia's piano, the one bought with money from her scholarship fund, and she would play "I Cross My Heart" while they all sang along, remembering the night when music brought them together with a legend and changed their lives forever.